It's been over 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people have died in this conflict. And now the U.S. president is set to meet with his Russian counterpart in Alaska to talk about ending this war. We'll have extensive coverage of that meeting for you tomorrow. But for a preview, I'm joined now by CBC's Lisa Xing, who's in Washington, D.C. So, Lisa, it seems like Donald Trump is already tempering expectations. What are you seeing?
He really is tempering those expectations, Natasha. Even today, Donald Trump reiterated that he's hoping this upcoming meeting tomorrow will set the stage, hopefully for quickly set the stage for a second, more important, in his words, meeting, one that would include Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. And so we've heard kind of this messaging throughout the week. This morning, Trump was on a Fox News podcast saying that he feels there's a roughly 25% chance that the meeting will fail. And we also heard this coming from White House officials. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said as well that this was going to be a listening exercise for Donald Trump. So a lot of managing expectations, because it's really unclear what exactly is going to be coming out of it. For his part, though, Russian President Vladimir Putin broke his silence today, kind of flattering Trump, in fact, saying today that the American administration is making energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities. Here's a little bit more about what Trump had to say about what he hopes will happen out of the meeting tomorrow.
I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens.
So I found it quite interesting that he had mentioned possibly bringing in some European leaders, because that had been a big concern for Ukraine's allies, that they would be left out of this process.
And Lisa, at this stage, it kind of seems unclear what actually will be achieved at this meeting. So what do we know about some of the main issues at play?
It really is unclear, Natasha. Whether or not a ceasefire can be achieved coming out of this is still to be determined. One of the big issues comes down to territory, and that concerned the European leaders, was a big concern for them. And this is why, because at first Trump had mentioned land swapping, and that really alarmed them. It alarmed Zelensky. That was his absolute no. There would not be any kind of territorial concessions coming out of this. And of course, for Ukraine's allies, any potential concessions in that realm would not only threaten Ukraine's sovereignty, but also European sovereignty as well. So neither of the leaders, Putin nor Zelensky, seem willing to budge on this at this point. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that comes up, because Trump had promised yesterday to European leaders, according to them, that he had said any kind of territorial negotiations would be done by Zelensky himself. So he had kind of softened his stance on that. Another question is whether or not Trump would be offering access for Putin, access to natural resources in Alaska. But Trump kind of brushed that off today, saying that he was focused on saving lives. So here's a little bit more about Trump and that second meeting.
I'd like to see it happen very quickly, very shortly after this meeting. I'd like to see it actually happen maybe in Alaska, where we just stay, because it's so much easier. We're going to find out where everybody stands, and I'll know within the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or 5 minutes, like we tend to find out, whether or not we're going to have a good meeting or a bad meeting.
Now we hear there will likely be a press conference Putin tomorrow in Alaska, but what exactly that will look like is still unclear. The White House floating that it could possibly take the form of a joint meeting between Trump and Putin, or it could be a solo meeting of just Trump, but it all really depends on how it goes tomorrow.
Okay, and we'll absolutely be watching that tomorrow and bringing you, again, extensive coverage on Hanomansing Tonight. CBC's Lisa Xing setting the stage for us from Washington. Thank you, Lisa. Well, let's get some more analysis on this upcoming meeting. We've invited to the show John Herbst, who is a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and is the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center.
Yes, thank you.
Ambassador Herbst, let me begin by getting your perspective on what the United States, specifically President Trump, needs to achieve at tomorrow's summit.
Well, Trump's been clear from even before he was elected president. He wants to conclude a durable peace between Ukraine and Russia. And he's offered a variety of compromises to both parties. Zelensky has accepted all of them. Putin has accepted none of them. He wants some indication from Putin he's willing to make serious concessions for peace.
Talk to me about those concessions. Like what?
Well, Ukraine talks first and foremost about some type of security guarantees or security measures. And while Trump is against Ukraine joining NATO, which would be the best guarantee, he has talked in the past, his administration has talked in the past about arming Ukraine to the teeth to deter future Russian aggression, or even having European troops there as peacekeepers. Russia has rejected those. But we need to see some indication from Putin along those lines if, in fact, he's serious about making peace. But he's not serious about making peace. He wants to continue the war, to take political control of Ukraine. That is his objective.
All right. So none of that is tenable for any of the parties involved, including Ukraine, of course. So what do you think the tactic is going to be from President Putin when he sits down with President Trump tomorrow?
He wants to make sure Trump does not turn the screws on him, which is why we got this summit to begin with. Remember, when Witkoff arrived in Moscow for talks last Wednesday of last week, the idea was if Putin had not stopped the shooting by Friday, there'd be huge sanctions. Putin instead countered with the notion of a meeting, which is what he did in May when there was a similar situation. And this is what we've got. So this step towards peace is only going to be a step towards peace if Trump, at the end of the meeting, recognizes, yes, Putin is not serious, and he begins the process of turning the screws on the Kremlin.
As you're speaking, Ambassador, we are showing live images of a protest taking place in Anchorage, Alaska, because, of course, this is so highly anticipated. People are quite concerned all around the world, but also most especially in Anchorage about what is going to come out of that meeting. Ukrainians who have gone to Alaska have been speaking publicly, saying they're very upset about the meeting taking place without Ukrainian representation. Could I get your perspective on that, sir, about there being no Ukrainian presence when these two men meet tomorrow?
Well, this is what I call a tactical mistake by the U.S. Trump, in fact, wanted to have a three-way summit, Zelensky, Putin, and himself. Putin said no, and the administration acquiesced. So what Putin sees right now is Trump did not put down sanctions when he said he would on August 8th, even though the war continues. Trump accommodated Putin by not allowing Zelensky to come. So Putin right now thinks he's having his way. And the only way Putin might consider concessions to have a real peace is if he knows he cannot win the war. And that happens when the United States is energetic in putting pressure on Moscow.
Ambassador Herbst, why is President Trump acquiescing to what Putin wants? Because, I mean, if you compare it to how President Trump behaved with Volodymyr Zelensky at that now infamous Oval Office session where he dressed down the Ukrainian president, and on the other hand, there's such deference for President Putin. What is going on there? Why?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but there may be something about President Trump's perception of Putin which plays a role here. It's also true that, of course, Russia is the only peer nuclear power to the United States. So President Trump needs to keep that in mind. Although Trump did a very good job 2 and 3 weeks ago when the Russians began to try to intimidate him with nukes, and he pushed back very well, much stronger on that than Biden had been. But still, this could affect his thinking. But clearly, he's not getting the best advice. I'm not sure there are any true experts on Russia in his inner circle, although I do think Secretary Rubio and General Kellogg understand what Putin's up to. I'm not sure the others understand.
We are anticipating hearing from President Trump tomorrow after the meeting has completed. What do you think we're going to hear? Is there any realistic possibility of a real peace deal happening when Ukraine isn't there?
No, and actually Trump's made that clear. And in fact, to his credit, after some statements about the possibility of making a real breakthrough late last week, Friday of last week, last Saturday, Trump has been lowering expectations, properly so. He even threatened major new pressure on Putin if he doesn't show some willingness to compromise in Alaska. So he understands that if there's going to be any progress at all here, still it's going to take time to make peace happen. But I think Putin's not going to offer any real concessions. He may try to change the subject, for example, talk about a new arms control agreement, which might be in the interest of both the United States and Russia, if Russia were to actually observe the commitments it takes on in such an agreement. He's going to try to keep Trump happy without offering any real compromises on the war. And the question is, how does President Trump react to that? And we'll have to wait and see.
And that would be a mild situation we would find ourselves in. But what if, Ambassador Herbst, we find ourselves in a situation where the meeting blows up and we see the Russian president say, no, I'm not agreeing to anything unless I get complete control of Ukraine, which, as you've also stated, as of so many people we've spoken to, that is the ultimate goal, complete political control over Ukraine. And if that's what Trump says going in and leaving, then where are we?
Well, look, there's no doubt in my mind that if President Trump wants to achieve his goal of a durable peace, right, one that is not broken by the Russians at some point in the next 6 months or the next 2 years, he's going to have to persuade Putin that Putin cannot win this war on the battlefield and that Putin's economy could not sustain the war effort. And the way to do that, President Trump has already pointed out, major American arms flowing to Ukraine, albeit paid for by Europe, and serious economic pressure, tariffs and new sanctions on Russia and its trading partners. If President Trump was angry at Putin's unwillingness to compromise tomorrow and announced that this is going to happen, and then it actually does happen, Putin's going to have to think twice. His first instinct will be, well, I can outweigh Trump the way I outweighed every other Western leader. Mm-hmm. But if Trump begins his policy tomorrow or the next day, and then continues it for 6 months or a year, the sanctions are biting, Russia's making no gains on the battlefield, Putin may have to make concessions for peace. That's the way to achieve a durable peace with an aggressor whose aim is to take over most of Ukraine and to move beyond Ukraine.
Okay, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Ambassador John Herbst, so great to get your insights, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.